Have you ever seen arrogance so extreme it backfires at 35,000 feet? Stay with us. This story will change how you see power, respect, and karma in the skies. Before we start, drop your city in the comments, hit subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss our next story. The usual chaos of Terminal C at JFK roared and hummed around 21-year-old Alyssa Gaines as if the entire world were rushing past her. People moved like currents of air, families juggling passports and strollers, business travelers glued to glowing laptop screens, tourists dragging overstuffed luggage. Yet, in the middle of the noise, Alyssa was calm. With noise-canceling headphones resting over her braids and a thick textbook on advanced propulsion systems balanced across her lap, she read quietly, letting the storm swirl without touching her. This flight was special. It wasn't just another transatlantic hop. It was the beginning of her semester abroad at Imperial College London, the final step before graduating with a degree in aerospace engineering. Flying had always been part of her life. The sound of a jet engine, the deep, steady thunder that made most people anxious, was her lullaby. Her father, Captain David Gaines, had flown this route for more than a decade. He had raised her on stories about lift, drag, and how the sky rewards those who understand it. When the boarding announcement for Priority Group 2 echoed over the PA, Alyssa closed her book and slipped it into her backpack. She adjusted her simple white t-shirt, dark joggers, and light gray jacket. Comfortable enough for a 7-hour flight, but still neat. Her braids fell neatly over her shoulders as she stood, stretching once before joining the line. That's when she noticed them. They looked like they'd walked off the pages of a luxury travel magazine. The woman, late 50s, platinum hair sculpted into perfection, dressed head to toe in a cream-colored cashmere travel set, radiated entitlement. Heavy diamond earrings glittered against her tanned skin, and her manicure was flawless. The man beside her was older, heavier, with a perpetually nervous expression, the kind of face that apologized even before he spoke. Alyssa positioned herself behind a family with 2 small children, leaving enough space to be polite. The woman, however, shifted closer, invading Alyssa's personal space with a cloud of expensive perfume. "Excuse me," the woman said without looking at her, voice thick with practiced condescension. "This is the priority boarding line." Alyssa lowered her headphones around her neck and answered calmly, "I know. I'm Group 2. She held up her boarding pass where the bold Group 2 was printed in large font. The woman, Megan Whitmore, glanced at it, then let a thin smile curl across her lips. How fortunate. They really let anyone board early these days. The comment sliced deeper than it looked. Alyssa had heard variations of it her entire life. The disbelief that a young black woman could afford priority boarding, that she could study aerospace engineering, that she had a right to exist in spaces some people believed belonged only to them. "It's based on the ticket you buy," Alyssa replied, refusing to rise to the bait. But Megan wasn't done. She turned slightly toward her husband. "Can you believe this, Paul? Standards keep slipping." Paul mumbled something non-committal, his eyes darting around the terminal, desperate to avoid the scene his wife was clearly enjoying. The boarding line began to move. Alyssa stepped forward. As she did, Megan swung her oversized tote bag in just the right way to smack Alyssa's side. Alyssa stumbled, catching herself on the railing. "Watch where you're going," Megan snapped, as though Alyssa had collided with her. Alyssa turned, the calm she'd been holding starting to fray. "You pushed your bag into me." "I did no such thing," Megan said loudly, attracting the eyes of several people nearby. "You're clumsy, probably overwhelmed by the experience." "I'm not overwhelmed." Alyssa replied, voice cold and precise now. I'm just trying to board my flight, same as you. Hardly the same, Megan muttered, just loud enough for Alyssa and a few others to hear. She gestured at Alyssa's outfit. My ticket ensures certain standards in the cabin. Or at least it used to. The gate agent, Frank Morales, looked over, his face a mask of exhaustion. Folks, let's keep the line moving. Scan your passes and proceed to the jet bridge. Alyssa scanned hers. It beeped green. Frank nodded her through, but behind her, Megan made sure to raise her voice again. You really should check who you're letting in here, she told Frank. Some people clearly don't belong. Alyssa swallowed her frustration and stepped onto the jet bridge. It was narrow and metallic, the sound of rolling luggage echoing around her. She breathed deeply, trying to release the anger curling in her chest. 7 hours, that's all. She'd never see this woman again. She was wrong. The sharp click of Megan's designer heels grew louder behind her. The couple had boarded immediately after. Some people have no pace, Megan muttered. They just hold everyone up. Alyssa ignored her. No one said anything. Passengers ahead pretended not to hear, their eyes fixed anywhere but on the confrontation unfolding just feet away. Near the aircraft door, the line slowed, forcing them closer together. Megan's cashmere sleeve brushed Alyssa's backpack. Then a harder shove. Alyssa stumbled forward, bracing herself against the wall as her headphones slipped from her neck and clattered to the floor. That's enough, Alyssa said, spinning around. Her voice was low, trembling with contained fury. Don't push me again. How dare you speak to me like that? Megan said, face twisting in exaggerated outrage. I barely touched you. You're aggressive, threatening even. I'm a passenger you've harassed and pushed. Twice. Alyssa replied, her voice sharp with engineering-level precision. That's assault. Megan laughed, brittle and ugly. Oh, don't be dramatic. Your people always play the victim. I'll be reporting your threatening behavior. The phrase, your people, hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Even Paul seemed shaken. Megan, please, he whispered, tugging at her sleeve. Let's just get to our seats. Don't you please me, Paul, she hissed. I won't be attacked in a hallway by someone who probably forged her ticket. At the aircraft door, Brenda Collins, lead flight attendant, noticed the commotion. Is there a problem? She asked, calm but firm. Yes, Megan barked, pointing a manicured finger at Alyssa. She threatened me. I want to see her boarding pass. I highly doubt it's valid. Brenda glanced between Megan's indignant face and Alyssa's tightly controlled anger. I'm sure this is a misunderstanding, she said diplomatically. Let's get everyone seated. Ma'am, 1A is to your left. I'm not going anywhere until I know my safety isn't at risk, Megan insisted. I want her off this flight. Alyssa felt disbelief surge through her. Removed? For being harassed? She asked Brenda, her voice cracking slightly. Let's all take a breath, Brenda said. We'll sort this out once we're seated. Please, clear the aisle. 15C, Alyssa answered when asked for her seat number. Premium economy, Megan sneered. Of course. Please head to your seat, Brenda repeated, separating them. Alyssa picked up her headphones and walked down the aisle. Her steps felt heavier with every eye she felt following her. She sank into 15C, her hands trembling as she fastened the seatbelt. Up front, Brenda personally escorted Megan to her seat in 1A. Megan demanded champagne before takeoff, behaving as though she owned the plane. The injustice burned in Alyssa's chest. She wasn't a victim. She was the daughter of a man who had dedicated 3 decades to this airline. She wasn't going to let this go. The cabin door was still open. Signal bars still flickered on her phone. Alyssa scrolled through her contacts and pressed Dad. He answered after 2 rings, his voice deep and steady, comforting, familiar. "Alyssa Bear, everything okay? Boarding started already." "I'm on the plane," she said quietly, "but there's a situation." "What kind of situation?" he asked, voice tightening. "Seat issue?" "No, a passenger, first class. She's been verbally abusive, pushed me twice, then told the crew I threatened her." There was silence, heavy, loaded silence. Alyssa could almost see his jaw clench, his brow furrow. "Name and seat," he said finally, his tone now stripped of softness. "Her name is Megan Whitmore, seat 1A. "Good," he said after a pause. "Brenda's lead flight attendant. She's one of the best. Stay in your seat. Don't engage with this woman again." "What are you going to do?" Alyssa asked. "My job," he said. And then the line went dead. A strange calm washed over Alyssa. The problem was now in the hands of the highest authority on the aircraft, the captain. And Megan Whitmore had no idea that the young woman she'd been harassing wasn't just any passenger. She was the captain's daughter. The confrontation was far from over. The cabin of Flight 227 buzzed with the restless energy of boarding. Overhead, bins slammed shut, carry-ons rolled into place, and passengers shuffled into their seats. Alyssa Gaines sat silently in 15C, earbuds out now, her phone tucked away. Her heart was still racing, but her expression remained composed. The events of the last 15 minutes replayed over and over in her mind. Megan Whitmore's sneer, the shove in the jet bridge, the poisonous "your people" still ringing in her ears. It wasn't just the insult. It was the way everyone around them had stayed silent. The way even the flight attendants had chosen to diffuse instead of intervene. It was a silence she knew too well. But now it wasn't just her problem anymore. Her father knew. The thought gave her a strange mix of comfort and apprehension. Captain David Gaines wasn't just her father. He was one of Trans-American Airways' most respected pilots, known for his unshakable professionalism and iron sense of justice. And if there was one thing she had learned growing up, it was that when he said, "I'll handle it," he meant it. A few rows ahead, Megan Whitmore was in full performance mode. Reclined in 1A with a glass of pre-departure champagne, she waved her hand dismissively at a flight attendant while recounting a wildly exaggerated version of what had happened. "She was aggressive from the start," Megan was saying, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "I was simply defending myself. I told them I didn't feel safe. Frankly, I don't think she belongs on this flight." Her husband, Paul, sat stiffly beside her, eyes fixed on the floor. He hadn't spoken a word since they boarded. Suddenly, the cabin speakers crackled to life. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen," came a deep, steady voice from the flight deck. "This is your captain speaking." Alyssa's breath caught. It was him. "We're just about ready for departure. Flight time to London Heathrow will be approximately 7 hours and 15 minutes. Weather looks smooth en route. Cabin crew, please prepare for pushback." A short pause followed, then, "And would the lead flight attendant, Brenda Collins, please come to the cockpit?" It was a small deviation from the usual script, but it was enough to change the atmosphere. Passengers exchanged curious glances. Flight attendants looked at one another. It wasn't standard procedure for the captain to summon crew over the PA before takeoff. Up front, Brenda's expression shifted from confusion to concern. She gave a polite smile to the nearest passenger and hurried to the cockpit door. It opened, closed, and for a moment the cabin hummed with low speculation. Inside, Captain David Gaines was waiting for her. Report, he said simply. Brenda straightened her posture, professionalism locking into place. There was a verbal altercation during boarding, she explained. The passenger in 1A, Mrs. Whitmore, accused the passenger in 15C of threatening behavior. She demanded that the younger woman be removed. I separated them to avoid a delay. Did you witness any physical contact? David asked. No, sir, Brenda admitted. But the passenger in 15C stated she was pushed twice. Mrs. Whitmore was loud, demanding, and used inappropriate language. Was the other passenger aggressive? No, sir. She was upset but calm. David nodded once. The set of his jaw changed. Thank you, Brenda. I'll handle this personally. Brenda blinked. Sir, are you sure? It was rare, almost unheard of, for a captain to involve himself directly in a passenger conflict unless there was a severe security issue. I'm sure, he said firmly. This aircraft doesn't move until I know that every person on board, passenger and crew, is safe and treated with respect. That includes the young woman in 15C. Brenda didn't argue. She knew better than to question that tone. Captain Gaines stood, adjusting the 4 gold stripes on his shoulders and smoothing the front of his Navy uniform jacket. The man who stepped out of the cockpit was not just a pilot, he was authority incarnate. He had flown through storms, landed heavy jets on icy runways, and commanded crews in emergencies. This was no different. The curtain between the first class and the galley rustled as he stepped into the cabin. Conversations died instantly. All eyes followed him as he walked the narrow aisle, each step measured and deliberate. The atmosphere shifted. Passengers sat up straighter, whispers stopped. "Captain!" Megan's voice dripped with sugary charm. "Oh, I'm so glad you're here. I was just telling your staff how unsafe I feel. I do hope my complaint is being taken seriously." David didn't smile. He didn't even acknowledge her words. His eyes scanned the cabin until they found seat 15. C, Alyssa, sat still, spine straight, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Their eyes met for just a moment, and though his face remained composed, she recognized the flicker of paternal warmth behind his professional mask. "Sir," David said to the man seated beside her, "my apologies for the interruption. May I have a word with this passenger?" The man nodded quickly, sliding out of his seat. David crouched slightly to meet Alyssa's eyes. "Ma'am," he said, his tone formal, "I've been informed there was an incident during boarding. Are you feeling safe and comfortable to continue this flight?" Alyssa took a steadying breath. "I was harassed and physically pushed by the passenger in seat 1A, she said clearly, her voice carrying down the aisle. "I do not feel comfortable with her behavior, but I am not a threat to this flight." David gave a small, controlled nod. "Thank you for your candor." He straightened and turned, walking calmly back toward first class. Every head followed his movement. The cabin was silent now, the kind of silence that falls when something serious is unfolding. He stopped, just ahead of row 1A, positioning himself in the aisle so he faced both Megan and Paul, with Brenda watching carefully from the galley. "Mrs. Whitmore," David began, his voice calm but commanding, "I've now spoken to all parties involved, including members of my crew and passengers who witnessed the incident. Here's what I know. You initiated verbal harassment. You made physical contact on the jet bridge. You made unfounded accusations and demanded that another passenger be removed." Megan opened her mouth to interrupt, but David raised one hand and the words died in her throat. "Harassment, intimidation, and physical contact between passengers create a hostile and unpredictable environment," he continued. "That is a direct threat to the safety of this flight, as it can escalate at any time." Transamerican Airways maintains a zero-tolerance policy for such behavior. According to federal aviation regulations and our conditions of carriage, which you agreed to when you purchased your ticket, I have the absolute authority to refuse transport to any individual I deem a risk to this aircraft. Megan's face drained of color. You can't be serious. I'm a Chairman's Circle member. I've flown millions of miles with this airline. Your status, David said flatly, is not a shield against common decency. It does not entitle you to abuse other passengers. On this aircraft, there are no elite clubs. There are only passengers and crew, and I am responsible for all of them. Paul's face crumpled. Captain, please, he said weakly. We have a meeting in London. She didn't mean. You had ample opportunity to stop this before it reached this point. David cut him off. Your silence was complicity. Then came the final blow. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, his voice dropping to a low, cold register that seemed to reverberate through the entire cabin. I'm ordering you and your husband to deplane immediately. A ripple of shock passed through the first-class cabin. Megan stared at him, mouth open, her composure crumbling. I'll sue you, she hissed. I'll sue this airline. I'll have your job. Do you have any idea who I am? Yes, David said evenly. You're a passenger who has just been removed from my flight. And as for my job, you might find that harder than you think. Because the young woman you harassed and assaulted, the aerospace engineering student in 15C, she's my daughter. The cabin went completely silent. For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. Then whispers rippled through the rows. Not gossip, but awe. The balance of power had shifted entirely. Megan stared at Alyssa now, and for the first time, she looked truly afraid. All the arrogance, all the entitlement drained away, leaving only shock and regret. Paul sank into his seat, burying his face in his hands. David turned slightly toward the galley. Brenda, please notify the gate. We have 2 passengers to be escorted off the aircraft. The decision was final, the authority absolute, and as 2 security officers boarded moments later to escort the Whitmores from the plane, every passenger on board understood one thing with crystal clarity. Respect wasn't optional. It was the law of the sky. The moment the order was given, the mood inside Flight 227 shifted in an instant. The artificial warmth of polite conversation evaporated, replaced by a cold, expectant silence. Every passenger in first class and premium economy watched as the once imperious Megan Whitmore froze in her seat, her diamond-studded hands trembling slightly as she clutched the armrests. For the first time since boarding, she looked small, stripped of the confidence that had fueled every insult, every shove, every entitled demand. 2 uniformed airport security officers appeared at the aircraft door, their presence subtle but unmistakable. The lead flight attendant, Brenda Collins, approached Megan's seat with practiced calm. Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Whitmore, she said evenly, you'll need to gather your belongings. The captain has requested that you deplane immediately. For a long moment, Megan didn't move. She sat rigid, her jaw clenched, eyes darting around the cabin as if searching for someone, anyone, to intervene. But no one did. Not a single passenger spoke up. The woman who had once thrived on the attention of those around her now found herself utterly isolated. This is ridiculous, she hissed under her breath, her voice cracking under the weight of disbelief. This is a mistake. Paul moved first. He rose slowly, avoiding eye contact with anyone, and reached into the overhead compartment for their bags. His movements were clumsy, hurried. the desperate motions of a man who wanted nothing more than to disappear. Megan followed reluctantly, her face pale and tight. "This isn't over," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else, but even she didn't seem to believe it. The walk down the aisle, normally a moment of triumph for first-class passengers, had transformed into a humiliating procession. Megan stared at the floor, refusing to meet the eyes of the dozens of strangers who watched her pass. Paul trailed behind, dragging their carry-ons like anchors. As they reached row 15, Megan's eyes flickered toward Alyssa Gaines. For a second, their gazes locked. Alyssa didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. She simply looked back with calm, unshaken dignity. And somehow, that made the humiliation cut even deeper. A soft, choked sob escaped Megan's throat before she caught herself. She quickened her pace, nearly stumbling as she stepped off the plane into the waiting hands of airport security. Paul followed silently, his head bowed. When the door sealed shut behind them, a collective exhale swept through the cabin. The oppressive tension that had hung heavy for nearly 20 minutes was gone, replaced by a ripple of low murmurs. Passengers exchanged glances, some of sympathy, others of disbelief. A few even smiled faintly, though no one spoke loudly enough to draw attention. The man sitting next to Alyssa, a quiet, middle-aged businessman, finally turned to her. "I'm so sorry you had to endure that," he said softly. "You handled yourself with more grace than most people could." "Thank you," Alyssa replied, a real smile breaking through for the first time since the ordeal began. "I just wanted to board my flight." A few minutes later, Brenda approached Alyssa's seat. The professional veneer on her face had softened into genuine compassion. "Miss Gaines," she said, "on behalf of the entire crew, I want to formally apologize for what happened. You should never have had to experience that." "It wasn't your fault," Alyssa said. "You were doing your job." "The captain's daughter," Brenda said with a knowing smile. "He must be very proud of you. You handled this with composure and strength." The engines whined to life as the plane began to push back from the gate. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, and the hum of the auxiliary power unit deepened. The PA system crackled once more. "Good afternoon, folks," came the familiar baritone. "This is your captain again. My apologies for the slight delay. We had to resolve a security matter before departure. We are now cleared for takeoff. Cabin crew, please prepare for departure." It was the same calm, professional tone Captain David Gaines always used, but this time it carried a weight that every passenger understood. This wasn't just a pilot announcing a flight schedule. This was a man who had just demonstrated, without raising his voice, that respect was non-negotiable. The aircraft rolled onto the runway and, moments later, surged forward with powerful acceleration. Alyssa felt the familiar press of gravity against her chest as the wheels lifted from the ground. The city lights below melted into a glittering web of gold and silver as the plane climbed into the darkening sky. When the seatbelt sign finally switched off, the cockpit door opened and Captain Gaines emerged. He walked down the aisle with the same quiet authority he had displayed earlier, but this time his face carried a warmer expression. He stopped beside seat 15C and leaned down just enough for his voice to be heard over the steady drone of the engines. "You okay, Alyssa Bear?" he asked gently. "I'm okay, Dad," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." "I'm sorry I had to put you in the spotlight like that," he said, "but I needed your official statement. It was the only way to make sure everything was handled by the book." "I understand," she whispered. "I was just so angry. She made me feel so small." David's hand came to rest on her shoulder, a brief, firm squeeze filled with strength. "Nobody gets to make my daughter feel small," he said. "You did everything right. You stayed composed, you spoke clearly, and you stood your ground. I've never been prouder." She blinked away tears and smiled. "Thanks, Dad. Now get some rest," he said with a wink. "We've got a long flight ahead. I'll see you in London." With that, he returned to the flight deck. The door closed behind him with a quiet click, a sound not of separation, but of security. The rest of the flight passed in a surreal, almost peaceful haze. Passengers who had witnessed the confrontation were kinder now, offering polite smiles and nods as they passed Alyssa's row. The man in the window seat even offered her his complimentary snack box. The crew checked on her more often, always with genuine warmth. But perhaps the most unexpected thing was the presence of a man in row 3, Marcus Bennett, a seasoned travel writer and journalist. He had recorded a short video of the confrontation and was already drafting an article on his tablet. He didn't approach Alyssa, and he didn't reveal what he was writing, but his intent was clear. By the time Flight 227 touched down at Heathrow the next morning, the world was already changing, though Alyssa didn't know it yet. The story of a first-class passenger ejected mid-flight for harassing a young black engineering student was about to explode far beyond the walls of one airplane cabin. For now, though, all that mattered was the steady hum of the engines and the comforting certainty that, for the first time since boarding, she felt truly safe. By the time Flight 227 touched down at Heathrow the next morning, the story of what had happened aboard was already leaving the confines of the aircraft. It began as a few posts, blurry phone clips from passengers, and a handful of first-hand accounts, but by the time Alyssa collected her luggage and stepped into the arrivals hall, the internet had latched onto it like wildfire. The first wave came from a travel blog called The Frequent Flyer Files, written by journalist Marcus Bennett, the man who had been sitting just 3 rows ahead of her. He didn't reveal Alyssa's name or the captain's, referring to her only as a young aerospace engineering student and him as a veteran pilot and father. But he described Megan Whitmore's behavior in brutal, unflinching detail. The insults, the physical shoves, the racial undertones, the entitled demand to have Alyssa removed, and the moment the captain calmly revealed that the woman Megan had harassed was his daughter. The post was titled "Entitlement at 35,000 feet," how a first-class passenger was removed by the captain and his daughter. It spread across Twitter, Facebook, and travel forums within hours. The shaky video of Megan shouting, "Do you know who I am?" followed by the captain's measured, devastating response, became an instant viral clip. Memes popped up overnight. Commentators called it the ultimate example of karma. News outlets picked up the story, first on local stations, then on national morning shows. And that's when Megan's carefully constructed life began to unravel. Back in New York, the Whitmores' ordeal continued long after they were escorted off Flight 227. Being removed by security triggered an automatic internal review by Trans-American Airways, and they were promptly added to the airline's disruptive passenger watch list. Their rebooked flight the next day was far less comfortable. 2 middle seats in the last row of economy, directly beside the lavatories. It was a quiet but unmistakable message from the airline. But the real blow came when the internet uncovered who Megan Whitmore really was. She wasn't just a wealthy traveler. She was a board member and brand ambassador for Vitalia, a luxury lifestyle company whose entire image revolved around inclusivity, compassion, and authentic living. Vitalia sponsored diversity initiatives, partnered with youth charities, and sold $900 yoga mats to celebrities and CEOs. Now, the comments under every one of their social media posts were flooded with outrage. How can you preach inclusivity when your board member does this? Firing her would be the first authentic thing Vitalia's done. This isn't just bad optics, it's hypocrisy on a global stage. Vitalia scrambled to respond, issuing a vague corporate statement about investigating an incident involving one of our board members. But it was too little, too late. Marcus Bennett published a follow-up article linking Megan directly to the company, calling out the staggering disconnect between its marketing and the behavior of its leadership. National news outlets soon followed suit, with segments titled Inclusivity Inc., the airline scandal that's rocking a luxury brand. The pressure was immediate and intense. Within 72 hours, Vitalia's stock price dipped noticeably. Investors demanded answers, and the board convened an emergency meeting. The decision was unanimous and swift. Megan Whitmore was asked to resign from her board seat and had her lucrative ambassador contract terminated. The official reason cited a morality clause in her agreement, one she had likely skimmed without a second thought. Her public humiliation was only beginning. The incident triggered renewed scrutiny of Megan's past. Old acquaintances and former employees came forward with stories of similar behavior, the belittling remarks, the sense of superiority, the racist jokes she claimed were just humor. It all painted a picture of someone who had built her life on entitlement and cruelty, believing her wealth and status would always shield her. But no shield could withstand the weight of the Internet's collective judgment. In the weeks that followed, invitations to galas and charity events dried up. Speaking engagements were canceled. Deals she had been negotiating for months quietly fell apart. Her social circle, once filled with fellow elites, grew thin as people distanced themselves from the scandal. Even her children's private school board, where she had served as a prominent donor, graciously accepted her resignation from their leadership committee. At home, the consequences were more personal and more devastating. Paul Whitmore, long accustomed to living in the shadow of his wife's domineering personality, could no longer ignore the reality. Being dragged off a flight, humiliated in front of dozens of passengers, and then paraded across national media as the husband of that woman had been the breaking point. For years, he had told himself it was easier to stay silent, that Megan's behavior was just how she was. But silence had turned into complicity. And now their marriage was crumbling under the weight of decades of toxicity. The final blow came in the form of divorce papers filed quietly but decisively just 3 months after the incident. Paul cited irreconcilable differences, but the truth was clear. The incident on Flight 227 had forced him to see his wife for who she truly was. The life Megan had built, the board seats, the speaking tours, the socialite status, the carefully curated image of sophistication, came crashing down in a matter of weeks. She lost her income, her reputation, and her marriage. The multi-million-dollar mansion in the Hamptons, once the backdrop of summer parties and charity fundraisers, was quietly listed for sale to cover mounting legal fees and lifestyle debts. For Alyssa, following the story from London was a strange experience. At first, the headlines had made her stomach twist. The attention, the spectacle, the endless commentary. But as the weeks passed, her feelings shifted. She didn't feel triumph or revenge, just a deep, settled sense of justice. This was never about destroying Megan Whitmore. It was about accountability, about the undeniable truth that actions have consequences. Alyssa had been raised to believe in physics. Every force meets an equal and opposite reaction. Megan's arrogance had been a force, relentless, unchecked, and aimed to make someone else feel small. Now, the reaction had found her, and it wasn't just one woman facing consequences. Across the airline industry, discussions were happening. Cabin crew on forums and message boards shared stories of entitled passengers they had been powerless to confront. Advocacy groups pointed to the incident as proof that the system needed reform. Even Trans-American Airways' own leadership began internal conversations about strengthening support for crew and passengers in similar situations. What had started as a humiliating incident for one young woman had become something much bigger, a catalyst for change. The price of arrogance was no longer measured in champagne and frequent flyer miles. It was measured in lost power, lost respect, and a life that could no longer be built on the backs of those one tried to belittle. And for Megan Whitmore, the bill had just come due. 6 months had passed since Flight 227, 6 months that had quietly reshaped the lives of everyone it touched. The bitter chill of a London winter now swept through Hyde Park, stripping the trees bare and scattering pale leaves across the gravel paths. Alyssa Gaines walked those paths often now, bundled in a wool coat, earbuds playing soft music, the hum of jet engines far above a constant reminder of where she came from and where she was headed. Her semester abroad had been more than a success. It had been transformative. At Imperial College London, Alyssa threw herself into her studies with renewed purpose. Her professors described her as relentlessly curious and unflinchingly focused. She spent long nights in the engineering lab running simulations, designing propulsion models, and diving deep into the mechanics of flight, the same principles her father had explained to her when she was a little girl sitting on his lap in the cockpit. But the classroom was only part of the story. Living in London had given her space to grow in ways she hadn't expected. She found a tight-knit group of friends who knew nothing of the viral story, who saw her not as the girl from the airplane video, but as Alyssa. Smart, funny, passionate about space and flight. They spent weekends exploring old bookstores in Notting Hill, debating orbital mechanics over late-night curry, and watching the planes streak across the night sky from Primrose Hill. And then, one cold November afternoon, an email arrived that made her heart race. It bore the Trans-American Airways letterhead. It was a formal offer, a summer internship with the airline's engineering and maintenance division at Heathrow. It wasn't a gift or a favor. It was the result of her grades, her interviews, and the passion she had shown for aerospace systems. This was hers, earned by her own merit, and it marked the beginning of something much larger than a single semester abroad. Life was moving forward, but the echoes of Flight 227 hadn't faded. During one of their weekly video calls, Captain David Gaines appeared on Alyssa's laptop screen, still in uniform, sitting in the cockpit during pre-flight prep. There was a new look in his eyes, one that blended pride with something more profound. "Bear," he said, smiling, "something's happening at work I think you'll want to know about." Alyssa leaned closer. "What is it?" "Corporate's been flooded with messages ever since that blog post went viral," he said. "Not just from passengers, from flight attendants, pilots, even crews from other airlines. They shared stories about passengers behaving the same way, about how powerless they felt to do anything. And the company realized something. This isn't an isolated incident. It's a pattern." He paused, and for a second, the proud father disappeared and the seasoned pilot took over. "They're calling it the Flight 227 Protocol," he said. "It's a new training program for all cabin crew. It empowers them to intervene early, to stop harassment before it escalates, and it gives them my explicit authority to remove anyone who threatens the dignity or safety of another passenger, regardless of their status." Alyssa felt her chest tighten with emotion. "Dad, that's incredible." "It's more than that," he said. "Brenda's leading some of the sessions. She tells every new crew class that respect is as essential to a safe flight as fuel and functioning engines. Alyssa blinked back unexpected tears. This was the real legacy of that awful day. Not the viral video, not the downfall of a cruel woman, but a system that would protect people like her in the future. What had been one of the most humiliating experiences of her life had become a shield for others. Weeks later, on a rainy afternoon, she ducked into a small cafe in South Kensington. The place smelled of roasted coffee and wet coats, and the windows fogged gently from the warmth inside. As she sipped her drink and reviewed a paper on composite stress tolerances, her eyes drifted to a tablet someone had left behind on the next table. The screen showed a glossy online magazine, the kind that specialized in high society gossip. A headline caught her eye. Whitmore divorce finalized, Hampton's estate listed amid financial collapse. Curiosity tugged at her. She leaned closer, reading. The article detailed the spectacular collapse of Megan Whitmore's life. It described her resignation from Vitalia, the loss of her ambassador contracts, the lawsuits piling up, the public humiliation, and the avalanche of canceled invitations. Most recently, Paul had filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, the kind of legal language that, in this case, meant a lifetime of bullying and entitlement had finally driven him away. Stripped of her wealth and status, Megan was reportedly liquidating her properties just to stay afloat. The once celebrated Queen of the Hamptons charity circuit had become a social pariah, the subject of whispers at parties she would never again be invited to attend. Alyssa sat back in her chair. There was no thrill in reading it, no sense of triumph, just a quiet finality. Megan's downfall wasn't a story of revenge. It was physics, the inevitable collision between arrogance and accountability. An object propelled by hatred will eventually meet an immovable force. On her last weekend in London, Alyssa returned to Hyde Park. The sky was a pale winter blue, streaked with the white trails of airplanes carving paths far above the earth. She watched one of them for a long time, imagining the view from the cockpit, the thin curve of the horizon, the soft swirl of clouds, the vast expanse beyond. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her father. There were no words at first, just a photo, a breathtaking shot from his flight deck at cruising altitude. The deep blue of the upper atmosphere faded into the blackness of space, and the gentle curve of the earth stretched below, wrapped in its delicate veil of clouds. A second message followed. Your office view next summer. Keep climbing. Dad. Tears pricked Alyssa's eyes, not of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude. That single image encapsulated everything. From that altitude, the divisions and prejudices of the world seemed impossibly small, and that was her destiny now, to build, design, and understand the systems that allowed humanity to see the world from such breathtaking heights. She smiled, wiping her eyes as a cold wind rushed across the park. The world was far from perfect. There would always be people like Megan Whitmore, people who tried to make others feel small to feel powerful themselves. But there would also be people like her father, people who believed that integrity mattered more than status and who refused to let cruelty go unchecked. And there would be people like her, engineers and dreamers who looked at the sky not as a limit, but as an invitation. No matter the turbulence on the ground, she would keep flying, keep building, keep climbing. And she would always, always remember that the smallest act of dignity in the face of hate can trigger change that reaches far beyond the clouds. What would you have done in this situation? Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn Turn on the bell so you never miss the next powerful tale of justice and karma.